Hello, and welcome to Fear Noir. Before we begin, take a moment to leave a comment and let me know where you're listening from. I always love reading them. If you enjoy slow, unsettling stories that gently draw you deeper into the darkness, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Now, make yourself comfortable. Let your body grow still and allow the sounds of the outside world to slowly fade into silence. Tonight, a story waits for you in the shadows, so close your eyes, listen closely, and let yourself drift into the darkness of Fear Noir. Story 1. Another long day at the office. I found myself staring at the wall clock as the minutes ticked away with agonizing slowness. All this mandatory overtime would be the death of me eventually. I was certain of that. But someone in this relationship had to keep things together financially, and that someone had always been me. My gaze drifted down from the clock to my phone's home screen. There was a photo of Sophie, my wife, smiling radiantly at the camera. That particular smile helped me get through these exhausting late hours at work. She was my high school sweetheart, the love of my life. It had been quite a while since I had seen her smile like that in person, genuinely happy and carefree. We never seemed to have any quality time for each other anymore. Sophie worked as a teacher and was constantly overworked, staying late for lesson planning and grading. Despite the long hours and low pay, she genuinely adored working with the children. Meanwhile, I managed all the bills and tried to keep us financially stable. That is when my phone suddenly chimed with a new message notification. It was from Ronnie, someone I had not heard from in years. We used to attend school together back in the day, though we had drifted apart after graduation. He had sent me a link to some website, along with a brief message. The website was titled The Challenge. The main page explained the premise in bold letters. We are looking for couples who are willing to prove that they can live without their partner. If you can survive an entire month without your significant other by your side, you will walk away with £1 million. At first, I assumed it was some kind of elaborate scam, just another one of those too-good-to-be-true schemes that people promote online. But as I scrolled through the list of supposed winners, there was Ronnie's name prominently displayed. Curious, I immediately checked his Facebook profile, and there it was. Clear evidence that his life had changed dramatically. Recent photos showed him living a life of absolute luxury. Images of him relaxing on an expensive yacht, surrounded by beautiful models, posing next to exotic supercars. My eyes widened with genuine disbelief as I felt a small pit of hope beginning to form in my stomach. Maybe this was not some scam after all. Maybe it was actually legitimate. After work that evening, I decided to call Ronnie directly to ask him about the specifics. I wanted to know if we could meet in person and discuss what kind of experience he had at this challenge location. He seemed strangely hesitant about the idea of meeting face to face. His voice sounded rushed and uncomfortable, as if he actively did not want to talk about his experience in any detail. All he would say was, "Don't ask too many questions," before quickly blaming his reluctance on having signed some kind of non-disclosure agreement. Of course, they would make participants sign legal documents, I reasoned. That made perfect sense for something involving this much money. I made the decision right then to fill out the application form for both Sophie and myself. She would understand eventually, I told myself. Someone had to make these kinds of difficult decisions in our relationship, and it was usually me. We desperately needed a break from our current exhausting routine. It had been far too long since I had seen Sophie smile the way she used to. Ever since we lost our baby boy to illness 2 years ago, she had become a shell of her former self, hollow and distant. The challenge organizers replied to my application remarkably fast, much faster than I had anticipated. They sent a follow-up questionnaire asking extremely personal questions about our relationship, our finances, our medical history, but I did not hold back any information. An opportunity like this was simply too good to pass up. We needed this money desperately. That night when I got home, I told Sophie that we were going on a special holiday together. I carefully explained that it was structured like some kind of game or challenge, where we would be separated for a month, but would win a substantial prize. Of course, she was immediately concerned and frightened by the concept. She looked at me with worry in her eyes and said, "We don't spend enough time together as it is. Do you really think money will solve that fundamental problem?" But I worked hard to reassure her that this was the right decision. With that kind of life-changing money, we could get our old life back, the life we had before the tragedy. We could finally be together again properly, and neither of us would ever have to work another exhausting day. It was not as though we were not already accustomed to being away from each other constantly. She was always complaining that I worked too much and was never home. This was me actively trying to fix our situation, and somehow it still was not enough for her. The day finally arrived, and we boarded a massive luxury yacht that would transport us to the challenge location. The vessel took us on a long journey, all the way to a small private island located somewhere off the east coast. When we finally arrived, and I got my first proper look at the place, my eyes absolutely marveled at the incredible sight before us. The island was covered with beautiful villas constructed from pristine white marble and accented with gold fixtures that dazzled brilliantly in the bright sunlight. Exotic fruit hung heavily from lush trees, looking perfectly ripe and ready to eat. The whole place looked like something from a luxury travel magazine. Even Sophie, who had been skeptical and anxious during the entire journey, seemed genuinely starstruck by the sight of it all. A well-dressed man and woman approached us as we disembarked. They introduced themselves as the owners of the entire estate, though interestingly they never actually told us their names. I noticed that they both wore identical gold necklaces shaped like half of a heart. Their smiles seemed forced and rehearsed, almost unnaturally perfect. There was something uncanny about their expressions that I could not quite put my finger on. They were dressed in elegant clothing that matched the tropical island aesthetic perfectly. The woman wore a revealing white dress that flowed in the ocean breeze, while the man wore a crisp white suit that seemed specifically tailored to accentuate his physique. They kept exchanging meaningful glances with each other before they began explaining the rules and regulations of the island challenge. The woman spoke first. Then the man continued her sentence. Then she picked up again, finishing his thought. They spoke like some kind of eccentric couple, deliberately showing off their connection. You only get 1 hour per week to communicate with your partner. If you are found talking through any other means outside of that designated time, you will be automatically disqualified from the challenge. Leaving this island is not permissible under any circumstances until the full month is completed. Anything and everything you do on this island will remain completely confidential and secret. Their carefully chosen words did not ring any particular alarm bells in my head at the time, but I could definitely feel how tense Sophie had become beside me. She leaned close to me and muttered quietly, just loud enough for only me to hear, "I don't like the way he said that last part." She gave my hand a soft, nervous squeeze. I returned her worried look with what I hoped was a reassuring expression and whispered back, "It's just a scare tactic to make the challenge seem more intense. Don't worry about it." The couple then produced several legal documents that required our signatures to confirm our agreement to participate. I signed my name quickly, barely skimming over the dense legal text. Nothing particularly stood out to me as unusual or concerning. It all seemed fairly standard, just the typical legal protections and liability waivers you would expect. I glanced over at Sophie, who was reading much more carefully, and tried to speed her along. I said with slight impatience, "Come on, Sophie, we came all this way. Let's not waste time now." She glanced at me with visible annoyance in her expression and replied firmly, "There's nothing wrong with being careful and reading what you're signing." The wealthy couple standing nearby actually snickered at her cautiousness, which made me feel embarrassed. Finally, Sophie signed the documents with a reluctant huff, clearly not entirely comfortable with the situation. We were here now. We should enjoy the luxury and riches while we had access to them. The well-dressed man took Sophie's arm and began leading her away toward her assigned villa, while the woman gestured for me to follow her in the opposite direction. But not before Sophie cast one final lingering look back at me over her shoulder. I smiled and waved at her reassuringly. The marble pathways felt cool against my feet as we walked. I sank gratefully into the plush couch once we arrived at my assigned villa, looking around in amazement at the opulent surroundings. That same half-heart symbol I had seen on the necklaces was prominently displayed in gold on one of the walls. I also noticed security cameras positioned in all the upper corners of the room, their red recording lights blinking steadily. "It's just for your safety and security," the woman explained smoothly when she noticed me staring at them. "All of your secrets are completely safe here. Everything is confidential." I stared at the cameras for a long moment, wondering who exactly was watching these feeds and what they hoped to gain from monitoring me. Was this meant to be filmed for some kind of reality television show? No one had mentioned anything about that possibility during the application process. My concerns were quickly distracted by the absolutely incredible number of amenities available in the villa. It genuinely had everything a person could possibly want, and more. A fully stocked, built-in bar with top-shelf liquor, a beautiful infinity pool right outside the glass doors, every imaginable luxury and comfort. A personal chef was assigned to prepare whatever meals I desired. Exotic foods from around the world were available on request. There was a pleasant, intoxicating smell permeating the air, a mixture of the salt from the nearby ocean and an expensive perfume that seemed to linger everywhere. The staff members seemed extraordinarily polite and professional, all dressed in light, breathable clothing, suitable for the tropical climate. They maintained complete silence while working, each wearing a carefully practiced smile that never quite reached their eyes. Small earpieces buzzed constantly in their ears, presumably receiving instructions from somewhere. I noticed that their gazes seemed to follow me subtly wherever I moved around the villa. When I attempted to strike up a casual conversation with one of the staff members, they simply walked away as if I had not spoken at all, as if I was completely invisible to them. It must have just been strict professional protocol, I reasoned. My attention was drawn to the armed guards stationed throughout the property. Every few dozen steps along the pathways, there was another guard, standing at attention. They all carried serious-looking assault rifles that rested against their chests, ready for immediate use. They did not even seem remotely fazed by the intense tropical heat, standing perfectly still in their tactical gear. Their earpieces were constantly buzzing with communications. I shrugged off their presence as a reasonable security measure. This was an extremely remote, private island, after all. They were probably necessary to keep away any dangerous wildlife or potential intruders. The immediate luxury of my surroundings hit me all at once like a wave. I found myself wondering if Sophie's accommodations were equally impressive. But before I could linger too long on that thought, the woman who had escorted me gently pulled my attention away, continuing to show off various features of the grand villa. My first week on the island was genuinely amazing, beyond anything I could have imagined. The beautiful woman who had been assigned to stay with me kept providing me with expensive new clothes and accessories. She was meant to live in the villa with me for the duration of the challenge, acting as a companion and guide. I reminded myself constantly that I loved Sophie far too much to ever consider cheating on her. I was determined to simply relax and enjoy the experience. I was certain that was what Sophie would want me to do as well. The woman was incredibly flattering and attentive. She would compliment me on how brave and dedicated I was, working those endless, tireless shifts at my job, all for Sophie's benefit. Her hand would rest casually on my shoulder as we sat together watching the large television, even though it was not actually turned on. "I wish someone would care for me the way you care for her," she said wistfully. "You have practically carried this entire marriage on your back, all by yourself." I laughed off her comments initially, but part of me could not help but wonder if perhaps she was right. Had I been doing most of the heavy lifting in our relationship? She told me repeatedly that I was smart and decisive for making the choice to come here and participate. We shared expensive drinks together and lounged by the beautiful infinity pool for hours. I would occasionally hear a small drone whirring overhead, clearly recording us, but she always reassured me that it was just part of the standard security protocols. The security presence on this island certainly seemed extremely tight. She laughed genuinely at all my jokes, responding the same way Sophie used to respond years ago when we first started dating. I found I could not stop talking about myself and my accomplishments. I told myself repeatedly that this was all completely harmless. Finally, the time came for my first scheduled meeting with Sophie. When I saw her, my breath caught. She looked absolutely beautiful, perhaps the prettiest I had seen her look in a very long while. She had a delicate flower tucked into her hair, and she was wearing an elegant dress. Yet there was no smile whatsoever on her face. I assumed she was still adjusting to this new and strange environment. She kept her hands folded together tightly in her lap, her body language closed off. The armed guards stood extremely close to both of us, watching our every move. A large digital timer had been set up in advance to track our allotted hour. Sophie asked me quietly if I was enjoying my time on the island. I could not help myself and enthusiastically told her all about my incredible villa and all the amazing amenities I had access to. She managed a few small, brief smiles here and there as I talked, but she seemed emotionally distant and disconnected. She was probably just tired and overwhelmed, I told myself. I must have rambled on enthusiastically about my experiences for the entire hour without really letting her speak. She nodded her head at all the appropriate moments in the conversation, but it almost felt rehearsed and automatic, like she was not really listening. Just before the timer reached 0, she managed to squeeze in a few words. "I miss you," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. She reached out and squeezed my hand gently, but could not seem to bring herself to meet my gaze directly. I noticed the way the well-dressed man lingered close behind her, standing just within my line of sight. The woman who had been staying with me was positioned similarly behind me. It almost seemed as if they were intentionally trying to remain visible to us, to remind us of their presence. But all I could really focus on was Sophie and how beautiful she looked. When the guard suddenly shouted, "Time's up," we were practically pulled apart from each other physically. I brushed off Sophie's words about missing me. It was completely natural for her to miss me after a week apart. The second week arrived. That mysterious man kept lingering in my thoughts constantly. I could not stop wondering what exactly he was doing with my Sophie during their time together. The idea of him holding her close or touching her sent uncomfortable shivers down my spine. His cocky, arrogant grin kept appearing in my mind. Sophie was mine. She belonged with me. The woman assigned to me appeared by the pool one afternoon wearing an extremely revealing white bikini. I could not stop my eyes from taking in her appearance, drinking in every detail. She invited me to join her in the water, and I was not in any mood to decline the offer. As we relaxed together, she said casually, "Sophie doesn't seem very happy for you and your good fortune here. Maybe she has already moved on emotionally." Her carefully chosen words lingered in my mind much longer than they should have. The possibility of Sophie moving on was not something I ever wanted to seriously picture or consider. That man had absolutely no right to stand so close to her. I had sacrificed far too much in my life to ever lose her. I snapped back at the woman with unexpected anger. "You don't know her at all. Don't presume to understand our relationship." She apologized quickly and rested her hand gently on my arm in a comforting gesture. "I'm sorry. She just seemed emotionally distant during your meeting. That's all I meant." I hated how much her observation stung because it felt true. "Just drop the subject," I said firmly. A small, knowing smirk filled her face. She glanced over at the villa staff with a mischievous grin as they came to top up our drinks. She splashed playfully in the pool water. "You deserve to be looked after and appreciated too, you know." Her tone was light and teasing. I did not bother to reply to that comment. I simply froze, genuinely unsure why her words made my chest feel so tight and uncomfortable. As the second week came to an end, it was time for another scheduled meeting with Sophie. Her gaze immediately went to the woman standing behind me, lingering there for several long seconds. "Are you close with her?" Sophie asked hesitantly, her voice uncertain. "What? No, of course not," I replied quickly. "Why would you even think that?" I leaned forward across the table, my gaze locking intensely with hers. She could not possibly think that poorly of me. Her eyes searched mine, as if desperately looking for the truth hidden there. I could not stop the frown that filled my face at her obvious distrust. I tried to reassure her more firmly. "Hey, listen to me. I am not doing anything inappropriate with her, okay? The most we do is talk casually. Come on, don't be like this. Don't accuse me of something I haven't done." But she seemed absolutely hell-bent on not listening to my explanations. I recognized that particular look in her eyes. It was the exact same look she used to give me when I worked through our wedding anniversaries or missed important dates. I decided to turn it around on her. What about him? That man you're staying with? Are you getting close to him? Her entire body went rigid, and her expression hardened into a frown. No, absolutely not. Nothing is happening. Her voice was louder than necessary, almost defensive. Something fundamental had shifted between us, and I was not entirely sure the change was her fault. The guard abruptly called out that our time was finished. Sophie visibly relaxed at the announcement, taking a deep sigh of relief, like she had been holding her breath. My expression hardened as I stood up stiffly and left without saying goodbye. During the third week, my mind remained obsessively focused on Sophie and our deteriorating relationship. Did she genuinely no longer trust me after everything I had done for us? The luxury that had initially enticed and excited me now felt boring and meaningless. The staff continued to watch me constantly with those same fake-painted smiles. Was anyone or anything on this island actually real and genuine? The woman who was staying with me made repeated attempts to comfort and reassure me. She began dressing in increasingly provocative outfits. That half-heart necklace continued to dangle prominently around her neck, drawing my attention. The symbol that I had initially dismissed now suddenly felt quite significant and meaningful. I found I could not help but look away from it, uncomfortably. She would say things like, "When does anyone ever take care of you and your needs?" Her words resonated with something deep inside me that I had been suppressing. I found myself opening up to her more and more, telling her details about Sophie and my shared past, about all our struggles and the tragedy of losing our son. She was remarkably good at listening without judgment, displaying the same patient attention that Sophie used to show me years ago. I remember one evening clearly. Her fingers became tangled gently in my hair as I rested my head in her lap on the couch. I knew I should have moved away and maintained appropriate boundaries, but I simply did not. "You have been through so much pain and loss," she said softly. "I can see how strong you truly are." Her words made my chest feel tight with emotion. I felt genuinely seen and appreciated for the first time in years. A smile slowly crept across my face. That smile stayed there much longer than it should have. The time came for the third scheduled meeting with Sophie. I felt significantly calmer and more centered than I had the previous week. I told myself repeatedly that everything was going to be okay, that we would work this out. That is when I walked into the meeting room and completely froze in shock. My eyes widened in horror as I took in the sight before me. Sophie had a severely swollen, dark, bruised black eye. The discoloration spread across half her face. I felt my hands involuntarily clench into tight fists as I saw that cocky bastard's satisfied smile in the background. "Sophie," I said urgently, "who did this to you? What happened?" She continued to sit there as motionless and silent as a statue. Her gaze was completely unable to meet mine despite the obvious concern in my voice. It felt as though time itself had stopped completely. The ticking hour no longer mattered at all. I said her name again, my voice quivering slightly with a mixture of anger and fear. "Sophie, please talk to me." She finally spoke, and the words that came out of her mouth shattered my entire world. "I cheated on you," she said as tears began to well up in her reddened eyes. I waited desperately for her to take it back, to say it was some kind of cruel joke or part of the challenge. Instead, she fell into complete silence. The meaning of her words did not fully register at first. It was the absolute last thing I ever expected to hear from her mouth. She was the person I had given absolutely everything for, the person I had built my entire life around. Everything went completely quiet. The silence was deafening. "You did what?" My voice came out strained and broken. My mind actively refused to believe what she had just said, but her eyes communicated more than her words ever could. The crushing guilt was written clearly across her face. I knew her far too well for this to be any kind of lie. All reason and rational thought abandoned me completely. I stepped aggressively closer to her. My hands slammed down violently on the table, shoving it to the side. Not even the armed guards could initially stop me. "How fucking dare you?" I shouted. "I did all of this for us. Everything I've ever done has been for you." My voice broke with raw emotion. She glanced back briefly at that man standing in the background. "Go on, look at him," I said bitterly. She immediately began to curl up into a defensive ball and fell into complete silence. The guards finally grabbed me and forcibly pushed me backward before I could get any closer to her. I tried desperately to push past them, but the well-dressed man was already pulling Sophie away from the table. His arm slid possessively around her shoulder as he leaned down and whispered something directly into her ear. "Was I not enough for you?" I cried out desperately. The words echoed painfully in the empty room long after she had been dragged away. I could only stand there afterward, feeling utterly broken and completely defeated. It genuinely felt like my heart had been physically ripped in two. The days that followed passed incoherently, blending together into a haze. All I can remember clearly is attempting to drown out my overwhelming sorrows with alcohol. I forced all the staff members out of my villa. I smashed the security cameras in every room with empty bottles, needing to be truly alone. I did not eat anything. I could not sleep at all. My tears streamed openly and frequently. I often cried myself into unconsciousness. I could not allow anyone to see me in such a pathetic state. I felt this deep, consuming emptiness fill my entire core. Each happy memory of Sophie became a painful reminder of everything I had lost. Only after several days lost in this haze did I suddenly remember the detail of her bruised eye. Someone had physically hurt her. Someone had hurt my Sophie. A new thought struck me with terrible force. What if she had been coerced or forced into the confession? What if it had not been her choice at all? My breathing hitched as this possibility hit me directly in the chest, like a physical blow. It was the dead of night when I made my decision. Was I the only person on this entire island who could not sleep? I quietly sneaked out of my villa under cover of darkness. I did not care about the rules anymore, or the consequences of breaking them. I desperately needed real answers. I carefully made my way through the dense forest that separated our two sections of the island, and eventually reached Sophie's assigned villa. I cautiously peered in through one of the windows. There he was. That bastard still had his arm wrapped possessively around her shoulders. She appeared completely still and unresponsive. I could not see many details from this angle. I carefully made my way around to the door and managed to sneak inside, being as silent as I possibly could. I slowly approached from behind and peered over their shoulders at what they were looking at. The sight made my stomach drop violently. Drugs were scattered across the table in front of them. Pills, powders, syringes. What had he done to my Sophie? Her facial expression was completely empty and vacant. Her mouth hung slightly open. What have you done to her? I felt pure rage rising rapidly in my chest as I grabbed the man roughly, physically shaking him and demanding answers. He simply laughed openly and mockingly at me, his hands going weak and limp. His expression began to fade and blur. My arms immediately rushed to hold Sophie close. She felt cold to the touch. Far too cold. My hand shook violently as I reached up to check her neck for a pulse. There was nothing, absolutely nothing. The silence in the air felt completely unbearable and suffocating. Sophie? I spoke her name softly, desperately. Sophie? My voice broke entirely as I clutched her body tighter against mine. My eyes darted back to the drug-covered table. There was easily enough there to kill anyone, probably multiple people. That half-heart emblem was engraved prominently into the wooden surface of the table itself. No, not this. Anything but this, I thought desperately. What had she done to herself? What had he done to her? What had I done to her? I continued to kneel there, holding her, completely unable to move or process what was happening. Nearby Sophie's body, I noticed a folded letter. I picked it up with trembling hands and began to read, thinking perhaps this would provide the truth I had been desperately searching for, the hope I needed. The letter was written in Sophie's handwriting. Dear honey, I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me someday. I am so sorry for everything. They showed me things I did not want to believe about you. I am so sorry. I do not know what to believe anymore. They made me play psychological games. I could not win any of them. I am sorry. I tried to be strong for you. I am having to write this after I confessed what I supposedly did to you. You were always good to me. I will wait for you. Please save me. My heart hammered violently in my chest. I read the letter once, then twice, then a third time, hoping the words would change. My own foolishness and blindness was finally dawning on me with crushing weight. This was all my fault. If I had gone to her sooner when I first had concerns, if I had actually listened to her instead of immediately defending myself, if I had not been so desperate to be right and to win arguments, I had left her emotionally alone when we lost our baby boy. I had told myself I was keeping us financially afloat. I was working hard, providing for our future, fixing things the only way I knew how. But she had been the one drowning in grief while I worked. I remained kneeling there for a very long while. The oppressive silence was broken only by the man's labored, irregular breathing. My eyes traveled slowly down Sophie's body, taking in every detail, the broken, anguished look frozen on her face. She must have felt so desperately alone in her final moments. She had looked to me for help and understanding, and I had shouted at her and accused her. I carefully folded the letter and stuffed it into my pocket. The man was still breathing, his wheezing filling the otherwise silent air. I made a conscious decision about what I was about to do. My hands steadied as my breathing became calm and controlled. A single thought filled my mind. Why was he still alive when Sophie was dead? I reached across the table for a knife I had noticed earlier. Time seemed to slow down dramatically around me. I felt trapped in this single moment, suspended. I stared at my own reflection in the polished blade surface. I no longer wanted to feel so helpless and powerless. I slowly raised the blade above my head. The absolute terror in the man's eyes was unmistakable as he realized what was about to happen. I crouched down next to his drugged body, holding him firmly in place with my other hand. He started begging incoherently for his life. I did not stop what I was doing. I brought the knife down, again and again. Then slowly, gradually, his screams faded into the distance, until there was only silence. Armed guards began rushing into the villa. Having heard the screaming, I stood above the man's corpse, covered in his blood. I did not care if they shot me dead right there. I almost wanted them to. They quickly overpowered me with their sheer numbers, forcing me roughly to the ground. Someone injected something into my arm. Everything went dark as I lost consciousness. I woke up, disoriented in my own apartment, back home. My head was pounding with a severe headache. I sat there clutching my head for a very long while, trying to make sense of what had happened. The letter from Sophie was still clutched tightly in my other hand, now stained with dried blood. So it had not been just some horrible nightmare. The prize money, £1 million, sat on my coffee table in front of me in neat stacks. I stared at it until the sun came up, not moving. I did not know what I wanted from that money anymore. This was not the victory I had been searching for. All the money represented now was a constant reminder of my terrible actions and decisions. I did not touch a single note of it. The challenge was officially over, but Sophie was not coming home. She would never come home again. And it was entirely my fault. Story 2. My friend strongly suggested I post this story here after I told him what happened to me. So here goes. Nothing. I am finally ready to share this experience. About 2 or 3 years ago, I was on a long drive through the Appalachian Mountains. I had started my journey from Savannah, Georgia. Driving through the Appalachians was something I genuinely enjoyed doing whenever I had the chance. Those ancient mountains make me feel completely at home in a way that is difficult to articulate. I experience this overwhelming sensation of peace and deep comfort whenever I visit that region. It is hard to properly explain to someone who has not felt it, but I have always treated the Appalachians as my true home, the place where I belong, on a fundamental level. Anyway, this particular trip through the mountains was not purely recreational like my usual drives. The reason I was driving through them on this specific occasion was because of work, or more accurately, because I no longer had work. I had been employed at a large defense contractor's corporate office. I am not going to name which specific company it was, for legal reasons, and to protect myself, but it was definitely one of the major players in the industry, one of the big names everyone would recognize. That particular day had been absolutely catastrophic for me professionally. I had been forced to clean up a major security breach that was entirely the fault of one of my direct superiors. A highly classified document had somehow been leaked to the public, and as someone lower on the corporate ladder, I was the one who had to take responsibility and respond to the fallout. I spent what felt like endless days being interrogated and grilled by 2 severe-looking men in suits from the Department of Defense. They asked the same questions over and over in slightly different ways, trying to catch me in inconsistencies. At the end of their investigation, despite the fact that I had done nothing wrong and the leak was not my fault, they decided I was the convenient scapegoat. I was fired effective immediately. The very last thing I did at that office before leaving for good was collect my few personal belongings from my desk and stop by the common break area to drink. Some water from the large pitcher that was always kept there for employees. The water tasted strange, not spoiled exactly, but off somehow. I could not quite place my finger on what was wrong with the taste. It had an unusual quality that I had never noticed before in all my time working there. Regardless, I chose to ignore this oddity. I had bigger problems to worry about. I did not really have many close friends at that time in my life, so I did what made the most sense to me, given the circumstances. I decided to skip town entirely and leave my old life behind. I threw my belongings into my car and just took off driving with no particular destination in mind. When you are driving, especially driving alone for extended periods, it creates this unique sensation where it feels like the entire world is moving rapidly past you while you remain stationary. It feels like the world is actively forgetting about you, leaving you behind, like you are somehow entering a completely new plane of existence, one where it is just you, totally alone, isolated, with nothing but your thoughts for company. By the time I reached the start of the Appalachian mountain range, the sky had begun transitioning into that beautiful sunset purple color that I have always loved. It was incredibly serene and peaceful. During the harsh afternoon hours, the sun feels blaring and almost intrusive in everything you do, beating down relentlessly. But during those magical hours between 5 and 7 in the evening, the sun feels calm and gentle, almost as if it finally gets to unwind and relax after a long day of work. During this time, it releases those vibrant, saturated hues of deep red, rich purple, and warm yellow across the sky. As I continued driving deeper into the mountains, the sky gradually got darker and darker. After a while, it had become pitch black, with no remaining traces of the sunset. I know that many people might disagree with me on this preference, but nighttime is actually my absolute favorite time to drive. I just feel so wonderfully isolated from the rest of humanity. The feeling of being alone but safe in my vehicle as the world sleeps is comforting to me. Anyway, as I continued on my drive through the darkness, the cloud cover that had been obscuring the sky began to gradually dissipate and clear away. Soon, I could see the stars brilliantly displayed above me. They appear so close together from our perspective, like they are all friendly neighbors living on the same street, when the reality is that they are separated by literally millions upon millions of miles of absolute nothingness and empty void, isolated, alone in the vastness of space. What a beautiful dream that seemed to me. As I drove further into the night, the number of other cars on the road began to steadily decrease until they had disappeared entirely. No more bright headlights cutting through the surrounding darkness like a hot knife going through soft butter. It was truly just me, completely alone and isolated, with only my car for company. I lost track of time for quite a while. Hours could have easily passed, and I genuinely would not have noticed. What I did eventually notice, however, was that my car's fuel gauge was showing that I was slowly but surely running dangerously low on gas. My cell phone did not have any service signal in these remote mountains, which was not surprising. But fortunately, I spotted a weathered sign on the side of the dark road. The sign read simply, "Gas, 3 miles ahead." I glanced at my fuel gauge again. It was indicating I only had enough gas remaining to travel approximately 1 mile. This was going to be close. Shortly after reading that sign, my phone suddenly died completely. the screen going black. This struck me as odd because I had not really been using it for anything that would drain the battery. But I chose to ignore this strangeness as well. I had more immediate concerns. I made the decision to pull my car over to the side of the road and leave it there. I would have to walk the remaining distance to the gas station on foot. One nice thing about certain Appalachian roads is that some of them, especially the ones that run through valleys, can be remarkably straight for long stretches. But that geographical advantage did not make up for the fact that I literally could not see anything at all in the total darkness surrounding me. When you are inside your car driving, you feel isolated and alone, but you also feel fundamentally safe and protected. You do not feel vulnerable to the world outside. I absolutely hated feeling vulnerable and exposed, but when you are walking alone in complete darkness, you definitely feel vulnerable. The comforting thought that after I successfully obtained gas, I would be able to resume driving alone, yet safe through the dark void, was what kept me moving forward. The worst thing about walking in that absolute darkness was the extreme sensory deprivation I experienced. It felt as though every single step I took was a gamble, a roll of the dice on whether or not I would somehow slip out of this reality and fall into the next one, a place where you could not see or hear or feel anything at all. After walking for an indeterminate amount of time that could have been 20 minutes or 2 hours, I finally saw it. The glow. A soft, dim glow of artificial light that felt like discovering a bastion of civilization surrounded by an endless moat of consuming darkness. The parking lot of the gas station was surprisingly small, and there appeared to be only a single fuel pump. I had only brought cash with me when I left, no credit cards. I walked up to the entrance and grabbed the door handle. It was made of harsh, cold metal, possibly steel. I pulled the door outward and entered the small shop. The interior had blaring fluorescent lights that were almost painful after the total darkness outside. The bright light reflected intensely off the windows, creating the disconcerting illusion that this small shop was the only remaining vestige of reality left, existing in this desolate plane of existence. I stepped forward cautiously toward the front counter, which faced what appeared to be endless aisles of various food items and other miscellaneous products stretching back into the store. Behind the counter stood a man. He was significantly taller than me, maybe 6.5 feet tall, and had an impressively thick beard that ran down the length of his torso, almost to his waist. I found I could not think of anything appropriate to say. Social interaction had never been my strength. I simply handed him my crumpled cash and meekly muttered the words, "Gas, please." He looked down at me from his considerable height. Without saying a word, he placed his large hand on the cash and stuffed it somewhere behind the counter, where I could not see. At this particular moment, I felt intensely vulnerable and exposed. I stared up at him, this absolute Goliath of a human being. Without acknowledging me further, he turned and entered a door behind the counter, disappearing from view. I was alone again in the bright store, yet somehow I did not feel safe at all. Quite the opposite. A sense of inexplicable panic suddenly came over me like a wave. I started to sweat, despite the cool air. It felt like I had entered a fundamentally wrong place, somewhere that I should never have been allowed to see, somewhere not meant for human eyes. I turned around to face the aisles of products. Something was terribly wrong. The aisles looked like someone had taken them and stretched them out infinitely, like they reached on forever into the distance, fading into a black point of absolute nothingness, a singularity of total isolation at the end. Even though my rational mind was screaming at me to stop, to turn around and leave immediately, my body kept walking forward against my will, like it was, addicted to moving toward that wrongness. I reached out my hand toward the nearest aisle, and I looked on in absolute horror as my hand, too, started to stretch and distort, elongating impossibly. Yet I kept walking forward. Soon my entire body felt like it was being engulfed and stretched. I could not get out. I could not stop moving. I could not leave this space. It felt eternal. It felt like it would never end. It was consuming me completely, and I was going to be trapped here forever and ever. And the clerk tapped my shoulder firmly. I spun around, gasping. He was holding a red gas canister and pointing toward the fuel pump outside through the window. He muttered something to me, but I genuinely could not hear or understand his words. It was like he was speaking underwater. I looked around frantically. My hands and body appeared completely normal. The store aisles looked ordinary and finite. There was nothing wrong. Everything was fine. Had I imagined it all? I took the gas canister from his hands and walked quickly out of the store, desperate to leave that place behind. The single fuel pump stood alone in the parking lot, supporting a small metal roof overhead that provided a circle of light in the surrounding darkness. I held the gas canister up to the pump's nozzle and began to press down on the handle. A stream of liquid gasoline came flowing out of it and entered the canister with the force and sound of a wave crashing. The familiar smell of gasoline filled my nostrils, that distinctive highway smell. When the canister had finally filled completely, I released my grip on the handle and let the last few drops fall onto the pavement, disappearing into the darkness below. I stepped back from the pump. I began walking back into the all-encompassing darkness once again, heading back toward where I had left my car. The darkness, just like before, was utterly debilitating to my senses. I kept my eyes focused straight ahead and continued to march forward, mechanically. At that particular moment, walking through that void, I felt it. Total isolation. The thing that I had been craving and seeking. Complete separation from the world. But then something changed. I was not even consciously walking anymore. My body moved on autopilot. It would not have made any difference if I tried to control it. I became transcendent, separated from my physical form. Many people talk about their near-death experiences, describing how they see a bright beckoning light calling them forward. I did not get that kind of experience. No, what I experienced was something entirely different and far stranger. In that consuming darkness, I could not see my own body anymore. Except it did not really feel like normal seeing. It felt like I was watching something happen from inside my own head, observing from a distance, but not actually experiencing it directly. The darkness surrounding me began to flash rapidly with images. Insects, bees, ants, moths, butterflies, and countless others I could not identify. It was like viewing a film projector flashing individual slides at 20 times the normal speed. A rapid strobe of insect images. I kept thinking of the same phrase repeating over and over in my mind like a mantra. Drawn to light, like a good worker. It was all I could think. The phrase consumed my thoughts completely. The pictures of insects kept repeating endlessly, for what felt like infinity. The same flashes of various insects, just mixed together with sheer darkness. My sense of individual self had completely evaporated and dissolved. I no longer felt remotely human, and honestly, I did not even feel real or like I existed at all. The experience is genuinely indescribable with human language. I do not remember most of the details. It all blended together into an incomprehensible whole. I imagine that what I experienced might be similar to what experiencing a lobotomy might visually feel like, if that makes any sense. The next thing I can clearly make out and remember, I was sitting in a field, like the kind of beautiful meadow you might see in some idyllic fantasy television show. The sky above was that same exact hue of purple, that perfect sunset shade I mentioned loving earlier. The grass was impossibly soft and easy to push my hands through, almost like running your fingers through hair. It felt unreal in its perfection. Next to me, sitting in the grass, was my mother, a short woman with gray hair pulled back. She looked at me with an expression I could not read. In a completely calm, matter-of-fact tone, she told me, "You came to the light, like a good worker." I sat there next to her. I did not say anything in response. I could not form words. The purple sky above us suddenly shifted and transformed into a horrifying mass of eyes. Hundreds or thousands of eyes, all staring directly down at me. Everything began to flicker rapidly, with flashes of blinding white light. Then suddenly, I regained control of my physical body, all at once. The bright daylight felt like a flashbang grenade going off directly in front of my eyes after so long in darkness. I was standing precariously on the very edge of a cliff, maybe 40 feet high, on top of a mountain I did not recognize. I stumbled backward in shock and fell hard onto the rocky ground behind me. I looked around frantically, trying to understand where I was. Everything appeared normal. The sun was shining. Birds were singing. I was on a mountain. I carefully walked down from the mountain, which thankfully had a small hiking trail leading down. When I eventually made it back to the paved road at the base, I saw the horrific scene. A 3-car pileup, a terrible accident, twisted metal and shattered glass everywhere. Emergency vehicles surrounded the crash site. In fact, one of the severely damaged cars looked disturbingly familiar to me. I stepped closer, my heart pounding. It was my car. I was absolutely sure of it. That was definitely my vehicle, completely destroyed. Fire trucks and police cars lined the road. One of the police officers spotted me approaching and immediately told me firmly to step back, that this was an active crime scene, and I needed to return to my own vehicle. But I was certain of what I was seeing. That mangled car was my vehicle. I stood there completely dumbfounded, unable to process this. The police officer looked at me more carefully, noticing my confusion. I explained to him as clearly as I could that the destroyed car was actually my vehicle. I later found out through the investigation that the other 2 vehicles involved in the accident were limousines that had been carrying the governor of Georgia and his family members. The police detained and interrogated me for 3 full days, asking endless questions about how my car had been involved in an accident that killed the governor when I was not in it. They wanted to know where I had been, what I had been doing, if I had any connection to the other drivers. There were no survivors from the crash. Everyone in all 3 vehicles had died. Eventually, they had to let me go. They had no evidence I had done anything wrong, and my story, as impossible as it sounded, could not be disproven. I am now working as an accountant in Boone, North Carolina, for a small tech startup company. To this day, this remains the strangest and most frightening experience I have ever had in my entire life. I have tried repeatedly to find that gas station I stopped at. I have driven those roads multiple times looking for it. When I looked at detailed maps of the area where the governor died, there was not a gas station located anywhere in proximity for at least 30 miles in any direction. The gas station should not have existed where I found it. I have no explanation for what happened to me that night. I do not know how my car ended up in that accident. I do not know what I experienced in that darkness. I do not know if any of it was real. All I know is that I lost hours of time that I cannot account for, and people died. And somewhere in those mountains, there might be a gas station that should not exist, waiting for the next lost traveler to find it. Story 3. We had been warned repeatedly about what we might find, but that particular morning, when we finally drove up to the remote mountain location to clean out his old cabin, we were feeling more curious than anything else. He was obviously no longer any kind of threat to us now, not after what happened. His body had been scattered all across the mountainside, along with the twisted wreckage of his old private jet. So what possible harm could be done to us by mere words? That is all they were, right? Just words carved into wood and plaster. Nothing more than that. And yet, after we made it all the way up that impossibly long zigzagging dirt road that seemed to go on forever, our car getting increasingly scratched up by low-hanging tree branches that scraped against the paint and windows, when we at last climbed out stiffly and pushed our way through the dense, shadowy woods up to his sagging front porch, when we finally managed to wobble open that splintery door with its rusty hinges. What we saw waiting inside was absolutely magnificent in the most disturbing way possible. Forgive me, I know I am expected to handle sensitive matters like this with more compassion and empathy, but you would not have liked the guy either if you had known him. He was genuinely violent and openly racist. There is no sugarcoating who he was as a person. The words had been meticulously carved everywhere, covering all the walls from floor to ceiling. The knife, or whatever tool he used, cutting deep enough to reveal some kind of red material beneath the surface layer. Maybe it was just paint. Maybe it was something else. I try not to think about it too much. The handwriting itself was incredibly jagged and rough, almost mountainous in its peaks and valleys, if you know what I mean. And yet somehow it all seemed so precise and deliberate at the same time. Like in all the countless hours he must have spent carving all of this obsessively into every available surface, he had never made a single error or mistake. Every single stroke of the blade was somehow perfect in its execution. I am afraid that abusive, subhuman piece of garbage was secretly an artistic genius. The realization made me feel sick. And what is more, if you looked closely enough at the carvings and really studied them, you would gradually start to discern two completely distinct handwriting styles, two different voices speaking through the carved words. I genuinely do not know how he managed to do that. How do you carve in two different handwritings? Did he use different hands? Different tools? I have no explanation. There was no clear chronological order to when things had been carved, and words and phrases located physically near each other almost never appeared to be related in meaning or context. He apparently did not believe in writing complete, grammatically correct sentences. But still, if you spent enough time wandering through those cluttered, awful rooms, Breathing in that stale air, you would almost start to get the unsettling sense of a dialogue taking place, a conversation between two entities carved into the walls. Take, for example, this phrase carved over in the damp, mildew-smelling washroom, positioned up and to the left from the toilet. Open your eyes, my son, and then, way over on the ceiling of the pantry where everything had long since expired and rotted. Yes, Father, I see. And so many of the single-word carvings scattered throughout the cabin were simply the words, Father and Son, repeated over and over and over again. Father and Son and Father and Son, carved hundreds of times, ad nauseum, until the words lost all meaning. And when you started to read all those other less explicable carvings in that implied context of father and son, well, I guess you began to feel a bit of what he must have been feeling in his final months of isolation up here. You started to hear the voices he heard. One wall read, I love you, I love, my son, the world, our. Another section, what are these? These angers, the pain? Yes. We were beginning to feel quite cold as we continued exploring this drafty place from his childhood, now so ruined and desecrated by time and madness. Old family portraits hung at slanted angles on the walls, the eyes of him as a child seeming to watch and follow us wherever we moved. In the hallway, if you love something, you love. You let it, you let it. Above the fireplace, the light. I feel it. Free. I want free, I am afraid our brains were starting to fill up with what he used to dismissively call fanciful notions, long before he became whatever this version of himself was. And, as you probably know already, our original plan had been to take the whole day to thoroughly clean out the place and sort through his belongings. What items should we donate to charity? What things could we potentially sell to make back some money? That practical kind of thinking. We really do need the money desperately, you have to understand. The prices now to ship anything all the way out here to this remote location are absolutely astronomical. Straight ahead of the leaning queen bed in the master bedroom, carved in letters a foot tall, I let fly. Yes, go be. Inside the dripping cabinet, under the burnt kitchen sink, taste. I taste them. Taste. To fly. The plan had been to take the whole day working, and it had not even been 3 hours yet, and we did not even discuss out loud what the new plan was. One of us just silently found the lighter fluid stored under the sink and started pouring it everywhere, I guess. No words needed to be spoken. We both understood. There has been no relief anywhere in my entire life comparable to the overwhelming relief I felt watching his cabin burning behind us as we drove away. Thick black smoke rising into the sky, taking us anywhere but there. Anywhere at all was better than that place. So why is it that I can think about absolutely nothing but that cursed place, and those wall-to-wall carvings, and those terrible smells of rot and mildew, and those goddamn words repeating endlessly in my head? Every single shift I work at the gas station, the phrases echo through my mind. Every guitar lesson I give to students, these father and son characters jabber on constantly in my head, like they are having a conversation I am not supposed to hear. Just yesterday, a poor bruised kid I have been teaching for months started asking me concerned questions like, "Are you sure you're doing okay today?" And, "We can reschedule this lesson if you need to. It's really no problem." And so many old friends who I have not spoken to in years are suddenly coming back into my life out of nowhere, reaching out and asking me directly if I have developed some kind of drug problem, if I need help. And I have not done any drugs in my whole life, I am pretty sure, unless you count alcohol, and even that only occasionally. I am not on anything. The problem is not drugs. All I can think about, every waking moment, is those carved red words covering every surface. They will not leave my mind. They are just words. I keep telling myself, they are just words. I know they are just words, because he was just some poor, lost cause of an evil soul who went completely insane living alone in his isolated cabin for too long, and eventually committed suicide by deliberately crashing his private airplane into the mountain. And none of it actually means anything deeper. Nothing means anything in the grand scheme, because the universe is not like that. It is just random and mechanical, and we are all just star stuff that happened to gain consciousness temporarily, and they are just words carved in wood. Maybe putting these words in your head by writing them down will somehow get them out of mine. Maybe sharing this burden will lessen it. If that does not work, this might very well be the last you ever hear from me. I can feel myself starting to understand what the carvings meant, what the dialogue was really about, and I am terrified of what I might do with that understanding. The words are just words, but they are also so much more than that, and I think he knew that at the end. I think that is why he had to fly. Story 4. When I was a kid, I always looked forward with genuine excitement to my mother's payday. She would take all of us down to the Golden Arches to celebrate that measly paycheck she worked so hard for. McDonald's restaurants still had real charm back in those days, looking like colorful barns with sloped red roofs and that sign, that absolutely beautiful sign towering above. It had such an aura to it, that neon-tinted beauty that stood tall and proud against the sky, visible for miles. A hollow plastic statue of the clown himself always greeted us at the entrance door. Those dead, yet somehow playful eyes seeming to beckon us inside with a frozen smile. I would order the exact same thing every single time without fail. A double cheeseburger meal and a chocolate milkshake. We visited so frequently that the waitress with flaming red hair and freckles scattered across her cheeks knew every single one of us by name. We would place our order and settle into the same corner booth as she brought our trays loaded with food. My dad would inevitably make some crass, inappropriate joke at her expense. She would blush deeply and laugh awkwardly as my mother stared absolute daggers at him from across the table. Then we would all dig into the meat, like hungry piglets at a trough. Every week followed the same pattern, but somehow the food still tasted absolutely divine each time. Such a potent, perfect mixture of salt and crispness for the fries. The beef patties were thin yet firm, with the juices held so tightly within. The onions would melt under my tongue, and the processed cheese would coat the roof of my mouth with decadent, artificial goodness. I savored every single morsel, swallowing the parade of flavors with vigorous fever. Then I would wipe my greasy mouth with a paper napkin already stained with grease and gulped down the chunky shake that barely tasted like actual milk, let alone genuine chocolate. I absolutely loved those Friday night dinners at McDonald's. It was the only time we could all come together as a unit. It was the only time in the week I would genuinely call us a family. In high school, I barely scraped by academically with high D grades and low C grades. College was not even a realistic possibility, let alone a dream I dared to have. I was honestly fine with that reality. There was only one career path I saw myself falling in love with anyway. Only one place I truly belonged. The job interview went remarkably smooth. The manager wore a stuffy navy blue uniform and had angry red welts covering his face, his broad forehead covered in a constant sheen of sweat. The heat back in the kitchen area was absolutely sweltering, though I was not particularly surprised by this. He showed me around the entire kitchen and explained that I would start off working the fry station. I stood there in complete awe, watching the skinny kid currently manning that position as he submerged whole metal baskets full of raw potatoes into the bubbling grease trap. The heat radiating off the fryer was magnificent, and the smell danced around my nostrils like an old forgotten friend returning home. The training process itself was honestly a complete bore. Long, outdated video essays about workplace safety protocols and proper hygiene etiquette. Each video segment would end with the clown mascot himself hopping onto the screen, a painted crimson smile plastered permanently across his chalk-white face. Remember, folks, you can't spell teamwork without you and me. He would end each instructional video with that cheesy, nonsensical line that made progressively less sense the more you actually thought about it. You could tell by the severely faded color grading and the constant video skipping just how ancient those VHS tapes truly were. My first official day on the job went remarkably well. The manager watched me work closely and bestowed genuine heaps of praise on my performance. He said I was a natural with the deep fryer, that he had rarely seen someone take to it so quickly. The entire day flew by in what felt like minutes. I just absolutely loved hearing that distinctive sizzle as I whipped up batch after batch of perfect golden fries. It was like an orgasmic earworm, that sizzle, hitting that sweet endorphin rush every single time. Eventually, they rotated me through other positions, having me mop floors, occasionally work the cash register, and man the drive-through window. But I really took to the deep fryer in a way I could not adequately explain to others. Something about the sound was deeply soothing to me on a level I did not fully understand, made the long, exhausting days just melt away into nothing. My coworkers were friendly enough on the surface, exchanging pleasantries and small talk, but I knew deep down how envious they all were at how naturally I took to the fryer. I would spend countless hours making the grease snap and crackle, watching tiny bubbles of steam form and burst in a satisfying pop. Many of my coworkers would come and go, the high turnover rate typical of our industry. Mostly dumb kids with massive chips on their shoulders, thinking they were somehow too good to shove burgers into paper bags for minimum wage. I did recognize one particular worker from my childhood. She was significantly older now, with slight wrinkles creasing her rosy cheeks. Her long hair was not nearly as vibrant as it once had been, with slivers of gray streaking through her dull flames. She recognized me immediately on my first day, asking cheerfully how my family was doing, how my father was. I told her flatly that she would know better than me about that, and her plump face immediately burned bright red with regret and embarrassment. She has stayed clear of me ever since that interaction, but I frequently catch her stealing glances at me when she thinks I am not paying attention. She whispers to the others, working the line that I am a bit slow mentally, that it makes perfect sense that management would put a dullard on the relatively simple fryer station. Like I said before, they are all just jealous of my natural talents. Today was a genuinely good day, perhaps the single best day of my entire life up to this point. It started like any other workday, with me sitting alone in my beat-up sedan in the parking lot, staring up at those iconic golden arches. The golden hue had dulled considerably with age and weather exposure, but that gorgeous sign still stood tall and proud. The actual building was a tragedy, though, having long since been reworked into that generic concrete slab design that all the locations seemed to transform into over time. They had even removed the beloved plastic statue that used to stand at the door, which I considered a crime against nostalgia. I clocked in at approximately 8:30 in the morning and took my usual place at my assigned station. As I worked through the morning rush, I heard pointed whispers and caught snickering glances directed my way, though I was not entirely sure why. Suddenly, I heard a booming, exasperated voice call out my name. I turned around to see the sweaty, plump visage of my manager. He had an unusually stern look on his face and summoned me over with a pointed finger. I sighed deeply and scurried over to his cramped office, the door gently shutting behind me with a soft click. He plopped down heavily in his chair, the faded leather material squeaking out in protest against his massive frame. He grunted and wheezed as he fumbled around his cluttered desk for a particular piece of paper. His eyes lit up with visible stress when he finally located it. He slid the document across to me, and I picked it up carefully. The first thing I noticed was how unusually slick and translucent the paper felt. The entire sheet seemed to be coated in a fine layer of grease. The black ink was severely smudged and barely legible. I furrowed my brow, genuinely not sure what to make of this. The people out there think I brought you in here to begin the termination process. He cleared his throat roughly and waved a beefy paw toward the door. He spoke in a husky voice, his prominent second chin wobbling as he did. Rumors and hearsay, Martin. Do not worry about them. My heart still skipped a beat anyway, my pulse quickening at just the mere mention of the word termination. What is going on, Mr. Larson? I asked nervously, my timid voice sounding unnaturally loud in the cramped office space. He smirked at me and pointed directly at the greasy paper carefully held in my grip. You are getting a promotion, Martin. Assistant manager, he announced. My eyes grew wide with shock and disbelief, and I could not help but burst into a huge grin. Then a troubling thought suddenly streaked across my mind. But wait, is not Mindy the current assistant manager? I started to ask. Mindy is being let go. Corporate representatives are coming by personally to see to it themselves, he said, a grim tone hanging heavy in the air. Actually, the entire branch staff is being laid off, except for you and me. We are wiping the slate completely clean and starting fresh. I glanced down at the clammy wad of paper in my hands. I squinted and could barely make out certain legal phrases like NDA and threat of consumption. I looked back up at Larson and saw a distinct twinge of fear in his expression. This is all I have ever wanted, sir, my whole life, I replied honestly. I will gladly accept this promotion. Larson simply nodded and checked the current time on his phone. They will be here very soon. When the corporate representatives arrive, all entrances will be sealed shut. The promotion is as good as yours. Martin, I want you to know that. He reiterated firmly. But whatever happens during their visit, I need you to stay calm and go about your regular duties. Corporate will try and rattle you a little. Just stay strong and keep frying. Do not look any of them in the eye directly. With that stern warning, he shook my hand firmly and sent me on my way. I could not hide the massive grin smeared across my face as I exited the office. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Mindy huffing and puffing as she roughly shoved a bag into a customer's waiting arms. I took Larson's advice completely to heart. For the next hour or so, I kept my head down and focused entirely on the fryer. I did not mind this at all. I was genuinely excited, thinking about all the new responsibilities I would get to handle once I had Mindy's position. Larson stood in the middle of the kitchen area, carefully watching people shuffle around and mingle. Orders were unusually slow that particular day to begin with, so when the front doorbells suddenly rang, they rang especially loud. Larson looked up, and his normally sweaty face became ghostly pale. He rushed forward and clapped his hands together, rushing to meet whoever had just arrived at the door. I heard a couple of the front cashiers snicker quietly to themselves, mumbling in asinine disbelief about something. I just focused intently on the fries, getting batch after batch ready to go in their cardboard containers. My hands were thoroughly stained with salty calluses, and the overwhelming stench of potato fat clung stubbornly to my apron. God, I absolutely loved it. Behind me, I heard Mindy turn a corner and gasp audibly, carelessly dropping an entire bag of buns to the floor. Her chubby cheeks quivered visibly, her face draining of all color as she saw whoever had arrived at the door. No, 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 oh Jesus, no, she mumbled frantically to herself as she turned tail and sprinted toward the back emergency exit. She shoulder-checked a dull-eyed fry cook who swore at her loudly in Spanish as she barreled past him. The back exit was chained shut. I could hear the futile rattling of the chain as she huffed and gasped desperately. She was practically clawing at the door like a trapped animal, drawing confused murmurs from half-interested workers nearby. I remained heavily invested in meeting today's fry quota. I did not want to look like I was slacking off in front of the corporate representatives, so I just stood there at my station and hummed a little tune as I worked. From the front entrance, I heard hushed yet stern voices, followed by rapid, heavy footsteps approaching. Larson was grunting his way to the back, looking more moisture-coated than usual. I heard him sneer as he forcefully pulled a begging, hysterical Mindy away from the back door. She was in complete hysterics now, saying she would do better. She promised she would improve. Larson remained silent, just dragging her roughly by the arm. It was at that moment I stole a quick glance at the corporate representatives. There were 4 of them total, and they looked exactly like I had always envisioned in my dreams. One of them was a large, purple tumor with legs. Its skin was coarse and filled with open, weeping cysts. From all the way in the kitchen, I could hear the massive egg-shaped behemoth wheezing, its eyes pale and beady. Yellowish crust had formed around the edges of the unblinking pupils. Its belly was absolutely massive, like a keg of lavender flesh. It rested its grubby paws on its protruding stomach and waited patiently. Another representative wore a wine-red business suit with a wacky patterned tie, white gloves with faint mysterious stains, and pointed dress shoes. Its head was literally in the form of a mouth-watering hamburger. He smelled like an absolutely heavenly mixture of prime beef and fried pork. His bun looked somewhat stale, however, the meat appearing dry, and spots of moldy hair had sprouted in sporadic patches across the surface. The plastic-looking cheddar that formed his mouth was curved upward in a permanent sneer. The most normal-looking member of the group was a man dressed in striped pajamas and a black bandana hat. He wore a grimy-looking bandit mask across his eyes, and his exposed face was covered in pockmarks and grease. Splotches of what I assumed to be ketchup and mustard coated his entire outfit, and he wore a miniature apron like a cape. Finally, there was him, the man himself. Ronald McDonald stood in the center among the pack, wearing a slick yellow suit with his iconic red stripes adorning the arms. His face looked like it had been chiseled out of pure marble by a master sculptor, save for the spherical red nose he sported. His hair was a perfect perm that wept with crimson color, each individual strand perfectly sculpted into a fine curl. It looked like he had stepped directly off a pedestal from Mount Olympus. I felt my face flush hot as I quickly refocused myself on my work. Behind me, Mindy was still crying desperately, and the other workers were starting to ask increasingly concerned questions. Larson raised a hand for silence, and the corporate representatives waltzed over to the main counter area. "Can I have everyone's attention, please?" Larson began loudly. A small crowd of employees gathered around him, save for me and a couple of the cashiers, who were openly gawking at the corporate representatives. Mindy was still pulling desperately on Larson's arm, still begging to be released. To no avail. Larson's grip remained ironclad. Today we are joined by some very special guests from corporate headquarters. They are here to oversee our annual performance reviews. "No! Christ, no!" Mindy rudely interjected, her voice cracking. The mild crowd gasped, but Larson pulled her in extremely close and whispered something directly in her ear. She stood there trembling violently, tears streaking down her reddened face. Larson cleared his throat. "Now then, Mindy will be going first for her review. Mr. Ronald's group will look around and inspect all of your individual workstations. Please do not resist their evaluation." A barrage of confused questions erupted, but Larson ignored them completely and dragged Mindy forcefully into his office. It was at that moment I noticed the clown had broken away from the front group and was already waiting inside the office with a wide smile. The door slammed shut loudly, and the crowd exploded with utter confusion and panic. Should have called out sick today. The doors are all locked. Is this some kind of prank? Bro, look what these clowns are wearing. It's so ridiculous. Ronald's companions slowly entered the kitchen area, their eyes never leaving the chattering, nervous crowd. I felt something starting to sting my eyes, so I wiped my brow and focused on the task at hand. The heat was becoming unbearable. My palms were dripping sweat into the grease trap, but I held firm. I absolutely refused to look like a poor worker in front of my idols. Not like these other drones, just standing around panicking uselessly. I could hear them behind me beginning to shout at the corporate officials. I guess one of the representatives had grabbed one of the cashiers roughly. I shut out the growing roar of horror and screaming from behind me, focusing only on that lovely sizzle. I shook the basket. The fries had achieved a beautiful golden hue, and I dumped them and immediately got started on the next batch. In between batches, I could hear the distinctive sounds of a busy kitchen. Screams and desperate pleas for mercy went completely unheard by the corporate representatives. I heard thick, meaty squelching sounds and people slipping on the increasingly slick floor as they attempted to run. Someone knocked over an entire pallet of metal trays, and I nearly dropped a batch of fries. I was so startled by the crash. But I held strong and focused. The offending party's cries were soon drowned out completely by a gluttonous moaning sound and quick snapping noises like breaking bones. I paid absolutely no mind to the feasting happening behind me. It was above my pay grade to interfere. Corporate worked remarkably fast in their staff cuts. I have to say, within approximately 10 minutes, the entire restaurant had fallen silent, save for the sounds of wet slurping and methodical crunching, and one whimpering holdout that was swiftly and violently snuffed out. I could not hear clearly what was happening inside Larson's office, just muffled crying and shrill laughter. I sound like a broken record, I know, but I just kept frying batches. The friolator was my greasy muse, and I simply could not tear myself away from her siren call. There was some heavy thumping from the office, like meat being tenderized, and the corporate representatives carefully checked every single corner of the kitchen for unkempt stations or any survivors. The purple tumor creature stood directly next to me for a good while. I could physically sense its dead googly eyes studying me intently, feel its hot, steamy breath on the back of my neck. Its breathing was labored and wheezing, the overwhelming scent of rot and salt emanating from its massive body. It seemed to be carefully studying my frying technique. Unsurprising, of course, as I was the absolute best at it. Soon another set of eyes was on me, and a gloved hand clamped down on my shoulder. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the hooked nose of the bandit character. His mouth was thoroughly caked in fresh viscera, and he was literally drooling while looking at the perfectly golden fries. Yeah, you are really good at that," he mumbled as he stepped away. "Good job." The purple creature next to me choked out as it too waddled away on its stumpy legs. My face flushed with genuine pride, that cocky feeling you get when you are on top of the world and nothing can possibly bring you down. Behind me, the office door creaked open loudly, an overwhelming aroma of death pouring out. The clown emerged first, his iconic yellow blazer no longer clean and pristine. His makeup was thoroughly smudged, and he appeared extremely satisfied. Larson soon tiptoed out of the room, vomit clinging to his shirt, and he looked absolutely ghastly pale. Mindy was nowhere to be seen. The clown's crew stepped toward Larson, speaking in hushed, serious voices. They pointed directly at me, nodding their heads in clear agreement. Agreement about what exactly, I was not sure. Then the clown stepped forward alone, that wide smile still plastered on his face. I immediately averted my gaze and looked down at the floor. I heard him approach with heavy footsteps, each step a thunderous sound over the field of slick blood the floor had become. I tried desperately to focus on my sizzle, that soothing crispness that made it all worthwhile. Then he spoke, his mouth right next to my ear. Nice to meet you, Martin." His voice was silky smooth yet full of grit and menace. I did not dare look up as I stuttered a reply. "Thank you, sir." There was intense tension then, the only sound being the friolator sizzling away. "You are going to be second in command around here. Be in charge of whipping the new crop of workers into shape. What do you think of that?" The clown whispered directly to me. "It is an honor, sir. I will not let you down," I proclaimed. "You would do anything for this company, anything I ask of you. You would do it, with no questions asked," he mused. "Yes, sir," I said with absolutely zero hesitation. The clown nodded approvingly. "Good, very good," he mumbled, still leering over me. The soothing sound of the friar did little to ease the suffocating tension at that point. "Put your hand in the oil," he calmly spoke. I froze completely and instinctively snapped my head toward him, unsure if he was actually serious. Too late did I remember Larson's explicit warning about not looking the clown in the eyes directly. That split-second fuck-up will haunt me forever, and in that moment, I committed myself fully. I quickly plunged my right hand deep into the bubbling grease. The pain is absolutely blinding at first, as the superheated grease cleaves through flesh. Then there is complete numbness. Nerves melt away and are replaced with a throbbing, blistering nothingness. I know instinctively what he wants, so I watch it all happen. I watch my skin slough off my hand like wet sheets. What little remains becomes necrotic charcoal. It crackles and pops in the grease. That siren's call of a sound now seeming to cruelly mock me. I let my hand continue frying until he was completely satisfied. He did not say anything else, just gave a limp pat on my back as I heard him walk away, the distinctive squeak of his oversized clown shoes taunting me as he went to converse with Larson. My entire arm trembled violently as I winced and carefully pulled it out of the grease trap. I stepped back from the friar, my breath shaking as I still felt that intense burning sensation renew itself, even outside the grease. It smelled exactly like burnt, heavily salted pork. What was left of my hand. The tips of my fingers were fried and severely blistered. They looked like shredded needles. I could see throbbing muscle exposed in the palm, burned beyond any hope of repair. I stood there, frozen in shock, genuinely unsure of what to do next, simply awaiting the next command from corporate. Larson soon rushed over and gently wrapped the horrific wound in a cold, damp towel. I felt absolutely nothing as he did so. He whispered to me, saying I had done such an amazing job today. He also said how sorry he was, in a hushed voice only he and I could hear. From that day forward, I was Larson's right-hand man in every sense. My actual hand never fully recovered from the damage, the nerve destruction far too severe. It clung uselessly to my side, like a curled-up claw. The new hires did their best not to openly stare or take notice, but I did not blame them for whispering about it when they thought I was not looking. The new crop of workers was quickly whipped into proper shape. I tolerated absolutely no tomfoolery in my kitchen. I had earned that right through sacrifice. Corporate has not returned since the day of my promotion, though as he was leaving, the clown left me with some parting words. "Keep up the excellent work, and you will be running the entire show by year's end." It is nearing that time now, and Larson seems increasingly nervous about how well I am performing. I suspect he knows his time is rapidly approaching. My ascension is soon at hand. The clown has come to me in my restless dreams and spoken of riches and wonders beyond what the golden arches could ever offer. I envy Larson honestly. Soon he will know the blessing of corporate's special retirement package. I envy him, but deep in my heart, I know that one day I too will be replaced, same as him. I genuinely look forward to that day. I love working at McDonald's. It has given me everything I have ever wanted, and all I had to do was sell my blood, sweat, and soul Every time I hear that fryer ding, I know it was worth it. Story 5. I didn't plan on staying long when I took the job, and I think that's important to say up front because it means I wasn't the kind of person who went looking for something strange, or exciting, or worth telling a story about later. I needed something temporary, something steady enough to pay rent, without asking too many questions. And when I saw the listing for ride operators at Black Ridge Park that was titled New Management, Recently Reopened, Revitalized Classic Horror Experience, it felt like the kind of place that would be just busy enough to keep me occupied, and just neglected enough that no one would care if I didn't smile constantly. The park had been closed for years before that, long enough for people around town to talk about it like it was already halfway gone, like something abandoned instead of something waiting. And when it finally reopened, there wasn't much fanfare beyond a few local ads and a website that still had broken pages. It wasn't polished, it wasn't modern, but it was open, and they were hiring. My first day started with a walkthrough that felt less like training and more like someone showing me what parts of the place still worked. My supervisor, Mark, had the kind of voice that always sounded like he'd just finished a long conversation he didn't enjoy, and he didn't bother pretending the park was anything more than what it was. "Just so you know," he said, as we walked past a row of shuttered food stands, "things break down. A lot, especially the indoor rides. If it stops, you don't panic. You grab your flashlight, you follow the track, and you get the guests out. That's it." "That's it?" I asked. "That's it," he repeated, then added, "And don't improvise. You stick to the path. If something looks off, it's probably just old equipment." Probably. That word stuck with me more than anything else he said. The ride I was assigned to was called Grave Passage, one of those slow-moving dark rides where guests sit in little two-person cars that glide along a track through a series of horror scenes, fake crypts, animatronic figures, painted backdrops that glow under black light. It was outdated in a way that made it almost charming at first, the kind of attraction where you could see the seams if you looked closely, where the illusion didn't try too hard to convince you it was real. Most people rode it for the nostalgia, or because the line was short, or because it was tucked far enough into the park that it felt like something you had to discover, rather than something being advertised. It broke down 3 times on my first shift. The first time I thought I'd done something wrong. The cars slowed, then stopped completely somewhere past the first set of scenes, and I remember looking at the control panel like it might explain itself if I stared long enough. The speakers cut out mid-audio loop, leaving the inside of the ride in a kind of hollow quiet that didn't feel natural, and then the radio at my hip crackled to life. "Grave Passage, confirm stop," Mark's voice said. "Yeah," I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "It just stopped." "All right," he said. "You know the drill. Flashlight, track walk. Get them moving." I grabbed the flashlight from under the console, opened the side gate, and stepped into the ride. The first thing I noticed was how quickly the atmosphere changed once I was inside. When you're operating the ride from the outside, it's just sounds and shadows, something contained and distant, but walking along the track puts you inside that space in a way that feels different, like you're not supposed to be there when everything is still. The painted walls seemed flatter, the props more artificial, and the silence stretched in a way that made every small movement feel louder than it should have been. I found the first car without any trouble. A couple sat inside, both of them leaning forward slightly, trying to see past the darkness ahead. "Hey," I said, keeping my tone light. "Sorry about that. We've got a temporary stop. I'm going to have you step out and follow me along the path. All right? Is this part of it?" the woman asked, half laughing. "No," I said, "just a technical issue." They climbed out, and I led them back toward the exit, the beam of my flashlight bouncing along the floor as we walked. It was routine, slightly inconvenient, maybe, but nothing unusual. The second breakdown happened maybe an hour later, and by then I was already less nervous about going inside. It felt familiar enough that I didn't hesitate, didn't overthink it, just grabbed the light and went through the same motions. The ride looked the same. The props were in the same places. The silence felt the same as before. At least, I thought it did. It wasn't until the third time that something felt different, and even then I couldn't have told you exactly what it was at first. The ride had stopped deeper inside this time, past the section with the hanging figures, and into one of the transition corridors where the decorations thinned out and the lighting didn't quite reach properly. Those spaces always felt a little unfinished, like areas you weren't really meant to focus on. And I remember thinking as I stepped onto the track again that it was darker than it had been earlier. Not dramatically, just enough to notice. I walked a little slower, sweeping the flashlight ahead of me, letting the beam linger on the walls and the floor in a way I hadn't before. The paint looked older here, more worn, and there were parts of the set where the illusion broke completely. Bare wood behind a facade, wiring running along the edges where guests wouldn't normally see. And then I noticed something that made me stop. There was a door along the side of the corridor, one I was sure had been closed earlier. It wasn't wide open, just slightly ajar, like it hadn't been shut all the way. I stood there for a second, trying to remember if I'd seen it before. Maybe I had. Maybe I just hadn't paid attention. Still, I stepped closer and pushed it shut with the side of my hand, the wood making a dull sound as it clicked into place. "Everything all right back there?" Mark's voice came through the radio. "Yeah," I said, glancing back down the track. "Just moving through." "All right. Don't take your time." I'm not. But I was. Not in a way that felt obvious at the time. Just small hesitations, small pauses where I let the light rest a little longer than necessary. It wasn't fear, exactly. More like attention. Like I was starting to notice things I hadn't before. I reached the car, helped the guests out, and started leading them back. Halfway to the exit, I heard something behind us. A step, soft, but distinct enough that I stopped walking. The couple behind me almost bumped into me, and the man let out a small laugh. "Part of the ride?" he asked. I turned the flashlight back down the corridor. There was nothing there, just the same narrow stretch of track, the same walls, the same darkness pressing in at the edges of the light. "No," I said after a second, "just old building. It settles." He didn't seem convinced, but he didn't argue either. We kept walking, and I didn't hear it again. It didn't feel like anything worth reporting, not on its own. And when I mentioned it casually to Mark later, he barely reacted. "Footsteps?" he repeated, leaning back in his chair. "You'll hear all kinds of things in there. Sound carries weird. Could be another operator. Could be a guest messing around. Could be nothing. It sounded like it was right behind me, I said. He shrugged. Then it probably wasn't. That should have been enough to dismiss it. It wasn't. Because the next time the ride stopped, I heard it again. Only this time it wasn't behind me. It was ahead. It became something I started expecting without meaning to. Every time the ride broke down, I'd grab the flashlight, step onto the track, and there would be this quiet stretch of walking where everything felt normal, and then somewhere deeper inside, I'd hear it. A single step, then another, always just out of sight, always far enough ahead that the light never reached whatever made it. I tried to catch up once. I didn't even think about it, not really. I just picked up my pace, moving faster along the track, the beam of the flashlight bouncing more erratically as I walked. The footsteps kept the same rhythm, the same distance, like they were tied to me somehow, matching me without ever letting me close the gap. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. I took a few more steps forward, slower now, listening. Nothing. The silence that followed felt heavier than before, like something had been removed from the space, instead of something simply ending. I found the car a few seconds later. The guests were already looking toward me, expectant, unaware of anything that had just happened. "Sorry about the delay," I said automatically, my voice sounding normal, even as my thoughts didn't feel that way. "We'll get you out of here." On the way back, I kept the light pointed behind us, more than ahead. I didn't hear anything, but I didn't feel alone anymore either. "Hey," I said later, catching one of the other operators during a break. Her name was Lila, and she'd been working at the park longer than most of us, even before it closed the first time. "Can I ask you something?" She glanced up from her phone. "Depends. Is it about the ride breaking down? Because the answer is yes, it will keep doing that." "No," I said. "It's inside the ride." That got her attention. She didn't look surprised, just quiet. "What about it?" she asked. I hesitated, then said, "When you walk the track, have you ever heard something, like someone else in there?" She held my gaze for a second longer than I expected, then looked away. "Yeah," she said finally. My stomach tightened slightly. "Yeah? Yeah. What is it?" She shrugged, but it wasn't casual. "I don't know. That's it. That's it," she repeated, echoing Mark in a way that didn't feel reassuring. I frowned. "You're not even curious?" "I was," she said. "At first. And now I just do my job," she said. Then, after a pause, she added, "Don't try to catch up to it." I felt a chill run through me. "I already did," I said. She stopped walking, slowly turned back toward me. "And?" she asked. I shook my head. "Nothing. It just stopped." She studied my face for a moment, like she was trying to decide whether to say something else. Then she didn't. "Yeah," she said quietly. "It does that." It didn't stay at the park. That's the part I keep coming back to. The part that makes everything else feel connected in a way I wish it didn't. At first, it was small enough that I ignored it. Things out of place. A cabinet door not fully closed when I knew I'd shut it. My bedroom door slightly more open than I remembered leaving it. The kind of things you notice for a second, then dismiss because there's no reason not to. I live alone. There's no one else there. There's no explanation needed, so I didn't think about it. Not really. Until the night I heard it. I was in the kitchen, standing by the sink, rinsing a glass I didn't actually need to rinse, just going through the motions of something normal after a long shift. The apartment was quiet in that comfortable way it usually was at night, the kind of silence you don't pay attention to because it's familiar. And then a creak. From the hallway, I froze, the water still running, my hand still under the stream. It wasn't loud, just the kind of sound a floor makes when someone shifts their weight slightly. Listening. Nothing. I told myself it was the building settling, the same explanation I'd given guests earlier that day, and I even almost believed it, until I took a step out of the kitchen and the floor in the hallway creaked again, not where I stepped, further down, like something had just moved away from me. I didn't sleep much that night, not because anything else happened, but because it didn't. The apartment stayed completely still after that, completely quiet, like nothing had ever made that sound at all, and that somehow made it worse, because there was nothing to point to, nothing to confirm or deny, just the memory of it sitting there with no place to go. The next day at work, I almost told Lila. I started to, actually. "Hey," I said, leaning against the control booth. "Have you ever?" And then I stopped, because right then as I stood there, with people walking past and music playing faintly from the speakers overhead, I felt something near my ear, not touching, just close enough that I could feel the shape of where something would be, if it were there. And then, very softly, so quietly I almost thought I imagined it, a voice, not loud, not clear, just one word: "Wait." I jerked back so suddenly I hit the side of the booth, my heart racing, my eyes scanning the space around me. "What?" Lila asked, startled. "What happened? Did you—" I started, then stopped. No one else had reacted. No one else had even looked over. "Did you hear that?" I asked. "Hear what?" I swallowed, my mouth suddenly dry. "Nothing," I said. She frowned. "You sure?" "Yeah, I'm fine." But I wasn't, because for the rest of the day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been standing there, close enough to speak, close enough to choose not to be seen. The ride broke down a lot more than usual that day. At one point after stepping out, I didn't go straight back to the booth. I stopped just outside the exit, standing off to the side, where the guests wouldn't notice me, trying to steady the feeling that had settled in my chest, trying to push it back into something manageable, something I could ignore the way I had ignored everything else up until this point. It didn't work. "Hey," I looked up. Mark was standing a few feet away, watching me with that same neutral expression he always had. But there was something else there now, something more focused, like he had been paying closer attention than I realized. "You all right?" he asked. "Yeah," I said automatically. "Just needed a second." He nodded slightly, but didn't look convinced. "You're spending longer in there," he said. "It's deeper stops," I replied. "Not always." I didn't respond to that, because he wasn't wrong. There had been moments where I had slowed down, where I had lingered longer than necessary, not because of the job, but because of what I was trying to understand. "You hearing it?" he asked. The question came out so casually that it took me a second to process what he meant. "Hearing what?" I said. He held my gaze for a moment, then gave a small, almost dismissive exhale. "Doesn't matter," he said. "Just don't let it mess with how you do things." That was the second time someone had said something like that to me. And just like before, it didn't feel like enough. "Mark," I said, before he could walk away. He paused, glancing back. "Yeah?" I hesitated, trying to decide how direct to be. "Has anyone actually figured out what it is?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Just looked at me like he was measuring something I couldn't see. "Does it interfere with the ride?" he asked instead. "No." "Does it follow guests out?" I swallowed. "I don't think so." He nodded once. "Then it's not a problem," he said. It's not a problem," he repeated, near firmly this time. Something about the way he said it shut the conversation down immediately, not because it answered anything, but because it made it clear that he wasn't going to say more than that. He turned and walked away, leaving me standing there with a question that had just become worse. I started noticing more after that. At home, at work, everywhere. Not clearly or directly, but constantly. Things that felt used. The couch cushion slightly indented when I hadn't sat there. The bathroom mirror faintly streaked, like someone had wiped a hand across it. The sound of movement in another room that stopped the second I tried to focus on it. It never rushed, never made itself obvious. It just existed, just outside of whatever I was looking at. I stopped trying to catch it. I stopped turning around quickly. I stopped checking reflections because it didn't matter. It was never there when I looked, only when I wasn't. The last time I heard it clearly, I was sitting in my living room, long after I'd stopped going to work, long after I'd started keeping the lights on, even when I slept, long after I'd convinced myself that staying still might make a difference. I was sitting on the couch, hands resting on my knees, staring straight ahead at nothing in particular, listening to the quiet, trying to prove to myself that the quiet meant something, trying to believe that if I didn't move, if I didn't give it anything to follow, anything to anticipate, then maybe it would stop. Maybe it would leave. Or maybe it had never been there at all. I sat like that for a long time, long enough that my legs started to ache slightly, long enough that my eyes lost focus, long enough that the room stopped feeling like a place and started feeling like something I was just inside of. And then from behind me, close enough that I felt it more than heard it, a voice, clearer than before, calm, certain. "That's not how you do it." I haven't gone back to the park. I haven't tried to explain any of this to anyone else. There isn't a way to explain it that doesn't make it sound like something it isn't, something simpler, something easier to dismiss. So I don't. I just stay here. I don't move much anymore. I don't give it patterns if I can help it. I don't react when I hear something in another room. I don't turn around when I feel it near me. I don't acknowledge it because I don't think it's following me anymore. I don't think it needs to. I think it's just living here now.